This is episode 375 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Wally, I have a feeling we're going to be talking a lot about P&M, a lot about the Energy Transition Act, and the availability of steady and affordable electricity between now and next July or this July and August, the summer months. Last week we talked about a story in the Santa Fe New Mexican that reiterated the concerns P&M has about their ability to provide steady power when the San Juan Generating Station closes due to the Energy Transition Act at the end of June. Well, we caught wind of a hot rumor coming out of the legislature, which was that there was a proposal afoot to have the legislature pass a bill here in the waning, really days of the legislative session, and this concept hadn't been introduced yet. But the idea would be to, at least as P&M saw fit, to keep the San Juan Generating Station open for 4 additional months. Now, this has 2 benefits. One is that they can avoid the worst heavy demand for power in the summer months. Great, good for P&M. That's nice.
Well, they can avoid having to turn off the power during that time. Yeah, they'll have supply.
Right. And the other one is that it would get Michelle Lujan Grisham past her election without any brownouts or blackouts, without having that inadequate power and then being blamed for it due to the Energy Transition Act. Now, my understanding is that P&M is pulling back from pushing that in the session. It was probably a long shot even for a juggernaut like P&M in this state to push that through in such short order. But we haven't heard the last of P&M and what they're going to try to do to avoid blackouts and brownouts next summer as the San Juan Generating Station is closed. I would look for the PRC or maybe even some kind of special provision from the governor, just an executive order or something. But yeah, I know you follow this situation pretty closely, and you share my concerns. What's your take?
Well, Paul, you and I have jokingly, and now it's becoming a lot less funny, have had the personal generator discussion. And I will just say if 0 is absolutely no need for one, and 100 is a total need, I'd have to say that the personal generator index is probably up in the 70s, 80s, or 90s for this next summer. And what that means is that, yes, P&M, given their current situation, turning off 2 units of a very large power plant without any necessarily reliable, good way to replace that in the short term, big problem for the state of New Mexico. And, the key is that it's not like they're running from this issue, I guess, to their credit. They created it by their huge support for the Energy Transition Act. And as that act is gone, they continue to hearken to they're going to even do better. Whatever the Energy Transition Act requires, we're going to do it faster, and we're going to reduce emissions even more than are required in a quicker manner. But not even out of the starting gate, and we're already seeing cracks with this Energy Transition Act transition part, and very concerning for New Mexico, no question about that.
Yeah, now, from a New Mexico utility customer perspective, a 4-month delay really only kicks the can down the road and not very far. Now, electricity usage in New Mexico doesn't tend to be quite as heavy in the wintertime, so you probably get a year. But the Energy Transition Act and P&M are already abandoning leases, power supply agreements out of Palo Verde, a nuclear power plant down in Arizona, and that would be happening in 23, I believe, and 24, 2022, 2023 and 2024. So the ability for P&M to obtain inexpensive but reliable power for its customers is going to continue to be limited as we move beyond the San Juan Generating Station closure. Four Corners is another one, another coal-fired power plant that's also going to be eliminated by PNM in 2024. What this procedure provision would really do is it would save Governor Lujan Grisham from potential blackouts and brownouts. That is the number one upshot. So it would be very problematic if they do that. The Republicans in the legislature, they said they would go with 4 years, which I think that's a different ballgame. I don't know if PNM will still be ready in 4 years, but
and if you go that long, the key is there's also Enchant Energy that's looking to put carbon capture. So that's possibly the thinking. I certainly don't have any details about what the Republicans were thinking on that, but that could have been what they're thinking. Is that's a way to facilitate that project where you get the double benefit of the security of that power from San Juan Generating Station in a low carbon dioxide emissions point of view. So
yeah, and 4 years isn't an eternity, but it certainly gives PNM some opportunities to get their ducks in order and presumably, hopefully, get past the COVID situation and find some battery technology. And, Enchant Energy could be a part of that mix as well. So a lot more opportunities, but there's no way, at least as I see it, that the environmentalists are going to go along with 4 years. 4 months might have been a challenge to get through, and that would have been a fascinating conversation. But I think this will, if anywhere, be discussed at the PRC. I don't know how that process will look.
Whether they have the right to grant an exemption or what happens under the Energy Transition Act. It may also be the Environment Department. But Paul, 2 points I wanted to make is that guess what? In the world of electric projects, we have these things called supply chains, and it's not just at your local grocery store that's an issue. So things are happening there. The other is that PNM had an integrated resource plan, which I have a hard time even saying those words without rolling my eyes because it's this planning process they do, and then they do whatever they want after it comes out. Yeah. But one of the things coming out of the period in which the Energy Transition Act was enacted was that PNM said, well, we know that we're going to have to build more natural gas fired generation to replace coal during this interim period. And so that was their plan. Well, lo and behold, they had the Avangrid merger, and people said, well, let's just go straight to renewable. So they're way outside of the plan that they had filed. So who knows what their new plan is. But the fact that they're, heaven forbid, talking about keeping a coal-fired power plant without carbon capture going for a number more months shows that what a serious position they're in, and by them making the entire state of New Mexico with regard to reliable electricity.
Yeah. Now, in a big development that happened relating to New Mexico politics this past week, Senator Ben Ray Lujan had a stroke at age 49, and I won't get into whether this could be or could not be related to vaccines. We've explored that subject and other podcasts. Certainly 49 is a very young age to be having such serious health issues. But as usual, Wally, we're going to focus on the politics of this. And Democrats in Washington have very narrow majorities, and now they really don't have the ability to impose a lot of their legislative will unless they get Republican support for some of it. And this is going to kind of back things up, so to speak. Now, the estimates are that Ben Ray Lujan will be back at his job in 4 to 6 weeks, and God willing, he is okay and 100% at the end of all this. But that is 4 to 6 weeks of precious legislative time that the Democrats are really going to be now cooling their heels for. And of course, all of this is really going to hit prime time when they have a Supreme Court justice vacancy this summer as Breyer heads to the exit. So, yeah, it's an important issue for New Mexico, but really impacting national political dynamics.
Yeah, no doubt about it. There's a lot of being said. First of all, wish the senator a full and speedy recovery. But in the meantime, it does cause a lot of questions about what happens to the agenda, as you said, and so we'll just have to wait and see. And this is not a New Mexico story; this is a national story. No question about that.
Yeah, its impacts are huge, though, across the nation, and I know that narrow margin really evaporated, and they've had a lot of discipline on a lot of big issues. The Democrats have, especially in the Senate, but also in the House, where they don't have very wide margins. And most analysts are expecting a very difficult year this November, this election for Democrats, and a good year for Republicans. So heaven forbid something, extends Ben Ray Lujan's time away from the Senate. That could have dire political repercussions for the Democrats. The last thing I know they want is to see another conservative Supreme Court justice. I don't know how that would work. Obviously, Biden still has time in office, but he's going to have trouble getting one of his progressive dream picks through a Mitch McConnell-controlled Senate. So really fascinating stuff there. We're not going to speculate any further, but just rest assured we'll be tracking it. Of course, other news, a lot of COVID stuff going on. Lujan Grisham extended her umpteenth, I believe is the scientific word for it, health order to March the 4th.
No one will play COVID bingo with us because there's never anything that's not extended. So,
Well, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that we have the best opportunity to see changes to future health orders starting on March 4th. Maybe even before then, but definitely March 4th. I think the governor is finally seeing the writing on the wall. Now,
and then, Paul, you're seeing more and more states, including many states that have Democratic governors, doing this. So I don't think that that statement is too far afield from what may happen.
By doing this, you mean changing?
Changing. Finally orders. Changing right. To where masks are a personal decision, not a mandate.
Right. Now, it is worth noting, though, that March 4th would take us to a week shy of 2 full years since the COVID emergencies began. And that may be a symbolic opportunity for the governor to say 2 years is enough or something. We shall see.
So March 4th also, Paul, is the date that's also a command in the military. So there's a lot of symmetry there. We may March 4th without a mask mandate, but how do you handicap it? Do you think it's likely, or I'm sort of a 50-50 on this. I think we might get one more, but who knows?
I think the governor. I will handicap it and say that I think either on March 4th or with the next order, or prior to March 4th, there will be a change to New Mexico's health order. I don't know what that change will be, and I do want to talk about that here momentarily. But it is worth noting that the 7-day moving average of COVID cases this is in New Mexico. So just back in early January, even mid to late January, we were talking about 5,600, 5,600 or so cases on a 7-day rolling average. That's January the 20th. It's actually the 3-day moving average, but same general kind of thing. Is it really peaked here in mid to late January, and we've seen it decline now. New cases as of yesterday, 1,556. So we're way down from the peak just a few weeks ago. Omicron did what we all expected it would do, which is it ripped through the population, causing some, damage and death, but really not like what we had even during the darkest days of COVID-19 and the other issues that have been going on for the last 2 years. It was serious, but it wasn't, the same kind of situation on a death basis that we've had at other times during the pandemic. We're still seeing some death, and that's always tragic, and it's something that hopefully comes to an end soon. But the notable issue is that other states, other blue states, I might add, are starting to evolve out of the similar policies that the governor has. And that's what leads me to believe that she may finally change her orders. Now, just in the last couple days, a lot of this happened just on Monday. So this Monday, Connecticut, New Jersey, and Delaware have set timelines to end mask mandates for schools. California and Oregon are setting dates to end their indoor mask mandates for the rest of us. Now, if I have the choice, and this is where it gets interesting.
Right.
Personally, I don't think masks should have ever been put on kids in school. The impact of COVID on kids was very, very minimal. Kids weren't the ones spreading it to teachers to the extent that we've had a teacher shortage due to COVID. It's just because Omicron ripped through the population. When a lot of teachers are sick, it's tough to get enough to teach the kids. Mm-hmm. But that's not because they're getting it from the kids necessarily. So the question, I guess, will be, does she eliminate masks for kids in classrooms, or does she follow the other path of indoor mask mandates for the broader population? Or maybe just everything, which would be fantastic. That would be my bet that she doesn't do that. I think we may get one of these two.
Yeah, and it's one of those, Paul, as you follow this issue, we're seeing a lot more data about how damaging masks are for particularly young children developmentally, psychologically. And, it's one of those things, do masks have a role? Whether you believe they do or don't, everything policy-wise has costs and benefits. And I think we probably are getting close to the point where all of the downsides of these masks are going to be way higher than any potential moderate benefit, as you point out, and has been widely the case since the beginning of COVID-19, is the immune systems of young children handle COVID quite well, thankfully. So,
yeah, and time will tell. I mean, she could change this order at any time. Obviously, the current order is through March the 4th, and like I said, that'll take us right to just about a year. So we'll see. It's I hope for the best, and just hope that she does the right thing, specifically for our children. Look, the fact is that you and I can go into a wide variety of stores and other public places indoors, and the enforcement of masks is spotty. It's in some places they're going to get on you if you don't have a mask on, a la NMSU basketball games where they kick people out and even arrested a lady. But most stores are done. They are not taking the marching orders from the governor in the same way they were 9 months ago, a year ago, whatever. And kids, though, in a school classroom, they have little to no control over their own bodies and wearing masks, which is, given our governor's track record, in my opinion, it would be likely, because I've disagreed with virtually everything she's done, it would be more likely, in my opinion, that she'll follow the California/Oregon route, which, as I understand it, would keep the masks on in the classroom. My hope would be that she would do the alternative, which is focusing on the kids first. But again, we'll see. As it stands now, we are one of that vanishing few number of states that has really not evolved at all on COVID since last August, when she reimposed the indoor mask mandate.
Yeah, and then, Paul, as you said, the Omicron variant is proven to be less lethal, but very contagious. And we're, for what it's worth, we now have a lot of people with immunity from Omicron. What is that worth if another variant comes along? We're not sure, but what is the worth of the vaccines? It's one of those that's ebbed and flowed, the effectiveness of that as well. But we are seeing it come down kind of just in time for springtime in New Mexico.
Yeah, which of course this is a seasonal illness. Now, on the COVID front, Johns Hopkins study says lockdowns had little to no effect on COVID-19 mortality, not morality. Don't know about the morality, but the mortality it definitely had no impact on. It did have devastating effects on society, i.e. children primarily, but of course economically as well. We're talking lockdowns specifically. This was always a little bit of a don't just stand there, do something kind of reaction, in my opinion, by the political establishment. And unfortunately, we have a governor that really felt compelled to engage more in more onerous lockdowns than most other governors. We've seen more onerous lockdowns internationally, and that's why we're also seeing some of the more large protests that have happened across the globe. But this puts some scientific data and analysis behind stuff that we had kind of said is just morally wrong. It's just inhumane. It's just not government's proper role in a free society to do the kinds of things that were being done supposedly to address COVID. And now good scientific data from one of America's leading medical institutions, John Hopkins University, has really backed us up on that. So very good news to have, and good data.
Yeah, and Paul, now that we're showing that lockdowns had such a very small impact on mortality with regard to COVID, we know that the other side, again, the costs and benefits of a policy. On the other side, we know all the problems that happen. And those lockdowns, really, if you trace them back from an economic point of view, it's the reason a lot of people left the workforce. It's the reason there's a huge worker supply shortage, why there's so many supply chain issues, and heaven forbid why one of the contributing factors for the inflation that we're seeing, it all kind of traces back to that policy. So the fact that we have some data. Again, John Hopkins rose to prominence in the 1918 influenza outbreak. So they're definitely been in the public health business a long time. It's very interesting that they came to the same conclusion that many had come to kind of intuitively, but they had the data to back it up.
Yeah, and also on the COVID issue, because it remains so pressing. Stacey Abrams out of Georgia. She ran for governor. She's apparently going to run for governor again. Took a photo of herself unmasked in front of a group of masked up young children. Presumably they were about 6 or 7 years old. And this is bad and shows yet again the hypocrisy of the political leadership. And of course, Abrams, being a liberal Democrat, is a big supporter of masks and all the government interventions that we've seen. I think the thing that really sticks out for me on this is the media way of covering her hypocrisy. It's the Republicans' pounce line is really one of my favorite, and that was basically the gist of a Washington Post article on the issue. But it's, NBC News, Stacey Abrams wades into school mask debate after maskless photo with children. Now, Republicans can be just as hypocritical as Democrats on a wide variety of issues, but if a Republican was doing something that they had spoken publicly about and imposed policies on, let alone on our children, it wouldn't be wades into mask.
No, it would be exposes children to dreaded COVID, and maybe like the governor of California with Magic Johnson, she was probably holding her breath during that entire photo. So we can give her a pass on this one. So yeah, and again, there's a lot of COVID policy hypocrisy across the world, and certainly the U.S. has not been immune from it. Maybe not the worst in the U.S. though, although we've had our share.
Yeah, the thing is, and I wouldn't have a problem if this was just a volunteer kind of thing, or even if Stacey Abrams had a more nuanced, different opinion about masks. Same with Gavin Newsom. It just when you are advocating for policies, and again, it's not about me wearing masks indoors. It's about my children who are unable to, if they want to look good for a picture. I mean, you've seen school photos of kids in masks. You have kids right now in New Mexico playing sports like basketball in masks. They're not given the benefit of the doubt for their actions. And that's the thing that really drives me nuts. And you also, just on the topic of masking, of course, the Olympics are underway in China, which, it is what it is. Let's just, you either like the Olympics and you want to watch them and you just kind of get past the fact that they're occurring in a totalitarian regime that created the COVID situation as it exists. To an extent, our politicians could have said, no, we're not going to do social distancing. We're not going to do masks. We're going to have a different approach to this thing. And, that's the reality because that's the best we can do. But if you like the Olympics and want to watch them, fine. But there was a Olympic level hockey game between, I believe, the women of Canada and women from Russia. And they played in masks, which was, Olympic hockey.
And was that required, or did they elect? Was that something they agreed upon? Do you know, Paul?
So the deal was that the Russians had not gotten their results from their COVID tests. And the ignorance, quite frankly, of the Canadian team, I don't know who was making the decisions for them, but the idea that they would all don N95. They were high-tech masks, not the cloth variety, but the fact that they would be interested in subjecting themselves to that in a competitive hockey match really show how deep some of the kind of paranoia has infiltrated people's brains in these ways. And, there's a lot of parents out there who get very freaked out if kids are out and about without masks on. So it's by no means just these Olympic athletes, but boy, the logic and the data don't really seem to seep through to a lot of people. And it's not just low information folks. It's really everybody. So yeah, they had a first of its kind, a masked hockey game. And by the way, I think Canada won handily. And I may be wrong on those teams, but I think the Canadians were definitely involved and wound up winning.
Well, the goalies wear masks anyway, and I wonder what I need to get on the Google and see how you put a COVID-19 protective mask on over your hockey goalie mask. Interesting.
I prefer the old Jason masks.
Yeah. Oh, exactly.
The horror movie masks.
They're scary.
That look pretty, those are pretty spooky looking deals. They might be a little more effective on COVID too.
They'll scare the virus away. They're so scary.
Exactly. All right. Well, there is a session going on up in Santa Fe, and to bring the theme of the session, broadly speaking, as it stands now, with basically, we're under 10 days of session of legislative time available. And right now, the theme is that if it's a progressive left-wing oriented bill, it's got a generally favorable reception. There's been hiccups along the way, and we're going to talk about some of the worst bills, but there's plenty of other bad bills, including the budget, which is a 13.5% increase. However, when it comes to the governor moving herself politically somewhat to the right, that really has not so far had great success in the New Mexico legislature, which is, of course, dominated by progressives. So Social Security repeal, tax repeal, gross receipts tax reduction, hydrogen hub, crime bills. Those are among the major issues that really have not gotten much traction so far in Santa Fe. We'll see. There's time available, and if the governor decides she wants to whip those legislators, that'll be an interesting one to watch if she can whip some of these progressives to supporting her more moderate agenda. But what's your take, Wally?
Well, with a an apology to Alfred Lord Tennyson, tis it better to have proposed legislation that moves to the right that fails than to have not proposed at all? That's the question. So does the governor get political credit amongst the voters for some of these things, or the fact that they don't pass means come November it'll be like they never happened? That is the big question, and
I don't know the answer to that. By the way, I think it's not that voters don't care what happens in Santa Fe in terms of what fails. Like, and I do want to unpack this a little bit because you make a very good point. So Susana Martinez, of course, when she was governor, and of course we know Republicans in this state have a lot tougher road to hoe in general than Democrats, but for two quote unquote glorious years, you had a Republican governor and a Republican House, and those two entities tried to bang their way through the Senate roadblock led by then Majority Leader Michael Sanchez. By and large, they were unable to do that. And you could blame Susana Martinez and her political advisors, personality shortfalls and whatever, but Michael Sanchez was basically there to destroy her agenda. That was his full-time job in the legislature. Now, did the Republicans get any benefit out of that? I think it's pretty much a no, and this state has moved dramatically to the left. Will the governor get any credit for talking about Social Security, talking about GRT, talking about hydrogen hub and crime? I'm going to say that I expect no, but we'll see. This election has all of the makings of a very, very difficult election, relatively speaking, for New Mexico Democrats. Things could change, but I don't expect that if she doesn't get something passed. I think if she gets Social Security passed, that will be her single greatest achievement as governor of the state of New Mexico, or another real tax reform. But Social Security tax elimination would be a political and policy coup for this governor.
Yeah, and I think from a political point of view, that would be huge for her to get that through. As we've talked, at this point, ad infinitum, ad nauseum, maybe not as impactful in the big scheme as some gross receipts tax reform, but believe me, people understand what this additional tax on Social Security would mean. And, I think it would be in addition, very positive thing for the state. You don't want to say it's a 100% issue because there are those on the far left that it seems like there's no tax that they don't like. And to reduce a tax, even on lower and middle income, not the lowest, but lower and middle income retirees, they wouldn't like that. But boy, most people would. But that does not look like that's not on the fast track, at least right this second. Although with the way things go, just bypass the committees. You could have something on the House floor, send it to the Senate, have something on the Senate floor, send it to the House. It could get done on literally the last morning of the session if the political winds and pressures are applied in a way that's going to be effective.
Yeah, and if it should fail, I would just say that the governor's had 3 years of sessions to do this before. She never made it a priority before for whatever reason, and she hasn't, at least as of right now, whipped her caucus in the legislature hard enough to get them to pass it. And when you have them of your own party, that's the magical difference between MLG and Susana, is that Susana never had the ability to get her agenda through her own party. She was always relying on the goodness of Democrats who had an inherent interest in killing anything and everything that they could. This governor, her party has an inherent interest in passing and supporting things that she proposes, because ultimately in New Mexico, it's really the governor in a gubernatorial election year that really drives the agenda. So she can say, yeah, Social Security, yeah, GRT, yeah, crime, hydrogen hub, all those things. But if you actually don't do any of that and you say, well, who killed it? Well, the Democrats in my own party. That doesn't get you, I think, very far with the voters.
Absolutely. And yeah, the Republicans, not every one of that list of bills you said, but most of them are much more likely to get strong Republican support. And just another way to say that, has she lost track and lost control over the more progressive elements of her party? To this point in the session, you'd have to say the answer to that's a resounding yes. But, you know,
Did she ever have control?
Well, no, and that is the issue. We don't know that. So when you're passing far left things and you're the governor signing them, there's not a whole lot to be done. But again, this very moderate move to the right on some of these issues has not been met, and at least initially, with open arms by members of her own party.
Yep. And maybe she's missing the opportunity to have supported guys like John Arthur Smith and some of those others in past sessions, maybe letting the progressive groups come in and clean out all those moderate Democrats. Maybe she's got some buyer's remorse, but who knows? All right, so the worst bills. And these are the very worst bills that we believe have a real shot of passage. SB 14, one of the governor's top priorities, clean fuel standard. This is the one that would impact your gas prices. I was driving around today, and thankfully for me, we have Sam's Club membership, so I filled up just above $3 a gallon, but I saw other stations at $3.50.
Well, and yeah, so when that would move it, you know, projections somewhere 30, 35, 40, maybe as much as 50 cents higher forever. So yeah, whatever it is, 50 cents.
While stuffing, biofuels and ethanol and other garbage into your gas tank that really isn't meant to be there, all for dubious environmental gain, not just because New Mexico is such a trivial amount of CO2 emissions, but because you're still causing other environmental problems, and you got to get those biofuels processed. You got to get them from somewhere. You got to clear land in Iowa and other places,
and use a ton of water, and none of it happens in New Mexico. But we get to pay more for it.
HB 6, another environmental bill. This would force New Mexico economically to use or generate half the CO2 the entire state did back in 2005. So what they're using is 2005 as a benchmark. This is HB 6. And then by 2030, we would have to use half or generate half the CO2 as a state. That is a huge order. I mean, you're talking about a growing population, growing economy. Yes, efficiency has driven some CO2 emissions down, but really that is a dagger aimed at the heart of New Mexico's economy just 8 years from now. And then by 2050, this would be the net zero piece of legislation, meaning that somehow, some way, the state of New Mexico in 28 short years would be required to not produce any net carbon emissions. Now, who knows what will happen by then, but it strikes me as really problematic because, businesses will start to make future investment decisions based on this kind of legislation. They don't want to wait around and see at the last second HB 6 is repealed or something. SB 8, this is the voting procedure overhaul. Third-party groups allowed to register voters. Health and Human Services Department and the DMV registering welfare in the case of HSD and MVD. These people, to give them they automatically be registered to vote, creating a permanent absentee voter list, also removing the pledge from the back relating to perjury, Fumer envelope. We go into a lot of detail with this on this week's Conversation podcast with Janice Arnold Jones. If you want to really unpack what's going on in voting laws, there's a lot going on this session, and Janice Arnold Jones, former state rep, she has a lot of great information on this. And then HB 132, which would impose the legislature's preferred rates on interest charged across the state of New Mexico, and more on the way that was passed through some committees. But boy, you talk about legislative overreach right there, HB 132. So Wally, 4 big bad bills as we hit the last several days of the session.
Yeah, and it is interesting. We're seeing the Oil and Gas Association come out with ads talking about the danger of environmental bills. Not that anyone necessarily cares what they say. They'll cash their checks, but they don't listen to them. And then the other thing, Paul, though, about using 2005 as a benchmark, that was the high watermark for CO2.
Sure.
So the key is we've already come a long way down from that. But I've talked a lot before about these things I call aspirational legislation. We saw a lot of these in the Obama administration, where we put a very tough, seemingly unachievable goal out there, what we used to call a stretch goal in industry when we had the goal-setting process. But it's amazing how, when it comes to energy, how so many of these stretch goals crash and burn, and a different approach has to be taken. And here in New Mexico, where you could argue that things like the hydrogen hub and some other things that are afoot could help move in this direction. They're not getting any traction of any kind at the legislature. So we're having kind of maybe a little bit of disconnect. At a high level, we're fine setting the goals, but anything other than wind, solar, and batteries is not the answer to it. Although as we've talked a lot, places like Germany and Europe in general have had huge problems because they got on the same path New Mexico's on and are forced to get off because of the draconian things that it did to their economy. And I guess in their case, they even have it worse than we do, because their natural gas supplier is not your friendly Southeast New Mexico oil and gas company. It is Vladimir Putin.
Now, on that HB 132, this is the interest rate cap. There was some process that was left to the side, and in dealing with the New Mexico legislature, I've kind of realized that where there's a will, there's a way. When the Democrats are in charge, they will manipulate the process and abandon, kind of parliamentary niceties for not niceties, principles in order to achieve their goals. And there's a couple of them that really stick out on this particular bill. One is that Deborah Armstrong had not been involved in any, she's a Democrat state rep, that she had not been involved in any committee hearings during the entire legislative session. I believe it was due to some health reasons, but suddenly, as the House Judiciary convened to deal with HB 132, Deborah Armstrong was on that committee and made the vote total a little bit more favorable to the Democrats, which is very close to changing the rules in the absolute middle of the game. And perhaps even more concerning is that HB 132 was put into the session, which is the 30-day session, which the governor controls the agenda, with an appropriation, which means that it automatically is germane. That means it qualifies to be considered and move through the process, regardless of what the governor puts out as a message. She did not put out a message for this bill, and yet EGOLF amended it or made it have an appropriation, and then it gets into the process, the appropriation is taken out. So it's kind of changing the rules in the middle of the game here in terms of what makes it legit to be considered. We'll see if the governor has anything to say about this at some point, because definitely the jealousy over the role of the executive and having the ability to put a lid on issues they want to see addressed and not addressed in a 30-day session is at stake here, because if all you have to do is stick an appropriation in and then remove it at some subsequent date when you get the committees moving, that seems very problematic for the executive branch. But who knows?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That is a very suspect. Although it is interesting, over the years, in the 30-day session, the legislature has found a variety of mechanisms to deal with legislation that they wanted to. And again, harken back to the Martinez administration, when you had a governor from a different party of most of the legislators, at least for 6 out of those 8 years, they would do similar things. But now it's being done totally under Democratic Party control.
Yeah, and well, we are going to leave it right there. We'll be in the middle of things next week still. We'll have a couple days left, and the legislature will be done next Thursday, the 17th. So stay tuned, buckle up. It's going to be a bumpy ride. Be sure to engage with your legislators, use our vote tracking system at riograndefoundation.org. Show up to committees if you can. And thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube and Rumble channels. Subscribe to this show at Apple, Stitcher, or have your Google Home play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.